Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Shahar Azani. He's Executive Director for Stand With Us Northeast Region. Mr. Azani, we appreciate the time this evening. In the 6 months since this war ended, why has it taken so long for the reconstruction efforts to get underway?
Only 2 days ago, the IDF commander, Major General Poli Mordechai, convened a press conference for Palestinian media at the gates of Gaza, at the Kerem Shalom crossing, and made it clear that the fact that Hamas insists on continuously abusing building materials to build tunnels to attack Israel, that need and Hamas's lack of attention for their own people's needs have hindered the rehabilitation process. And in addition, of course, what was mentioned in the story itself, the fragmentation within the Palestinian society itself and the disagreements between Hamas and Fatah in the West Bank.
Anytime you have a war, there's always civilians who get caught in the middle, both sides of a conflict, quite frankly. With that being said, just on the human side of this reconstruction, why hasn't more aid been able to cross into Gaza from Israel?
Well, let me tell you this. It was made very clear by the Israeli leadership that there is no desire whatsoever to bring upon more pain to the civilian population in Gaza. The Kerem Shalom crossing between Israel and Gaza has been open continuously. Through the crossing, you have over 500 truckloads of equipment and materials and goods making their way into Gaza every day. Over 1,000 people come out of Gaza from the Erez crossing every day for medical services, for pilgrimage to Jerusalem, for any other reason. Israel has no interest. Over 70,000 tons of building materials have been entered into Gaza. And again, the fact that it's not the Palestinian Authority that's managing these crosses, but Hamas, whose intentions are very clear. You just had Ghazi Hamad saying clearly Israel is the enemy. So let me tell you, and let me tell Ghazi Hamad, that Israel will have no desire to attack Gaza. Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005 with a clear intention of never coming back. The fact that Hamas, instead of investing their funds and money into rebuilding their own hospitals and hospices, are investing money in terror tunnels and using rocket launchers to the sea so that they can check what to do in the next round of violence, is a clear indication of whose malintent it is.
Obviously, there's still a lot of distrust between the Israeli government and Hamas in Gaza. So with that being said, from your vantage point, do you believe that the Israeli government is doing all it can do to help ease the suffering to the civilians in Gaza?
Well, you know, the Israeli government is in a very complicated situation. On the one hand, we have an enemy called Hamas. On the other hand, Israel does not have an enemy in the Palestinian people. But these materials that make their way into Gaza can be used to rebuild those hospitals and those homes that clearly need rebuilding. But they can also be abused by Hamas in order to build the attacks, the terror tunnels into Israel. What do? I can assure you of one thing. The fact that on Wednesday, the Israeli IDF commander met with Palestinian media outlets and spoke to them, by the way, in Arabic, in order to convey a message to the civilian population of Gaza. There is a way out of this, and there is a fast lane, and literally the keys are in the hands of Hamas, and we hope that Hamas will be able to love their children more than they hate the enemy.
Mr. Azani, please stand by. I want to get your opinion on some other subject relative to this conflict in just a few moments. Of course, Gaza wasn't the only area affected by the fighting last summer. Nick Schiffer now takes us to the Israeli town of Sderot, near the Gaza border, where Israeli families are still feeling the impact of last year's Hamas rocket fire.
Gadi Yarkoni can shoot hoops.
Epa!
He can throw punches. He can play Xbox. But he can't forget the war that ended 6 months ago. He remembers each time he looks at his legs.
Everyone was running, and after a second, I was flying through the air.
On August 26th, a mortar fired by Palestinian fighters from Gaza landed right next to him. He lost his legs. 2 of his friends died. Just 1 hour later, Israel and Hamas ceased fire.
Do you have any regrets? Had you just known when the ceasefire was going to start? you might still have your legs?
שאני לא מסתכל אחורה.
I am not looking backward. Whatever happened, happened. I cannot change it. Every day I'm getting stronger. Look at me. I can walk. I can even walk without help. You see, I walk with a limp. It hurts. It's difficult. But we shall overcome.
Today, his optimism comes from state-of-the-art rehabilitation. The Xbox helps coordination. The basketball, his balance.
Nice.
And the boxing, his strength. What really provides strength
מי עוזר לי תמיד?
is family. His daughter, 17-year-old Libby, isn't afraid of looking at his injury. Yarkoni isn't angry, but he warns those who fired the mortar.
אנחנו לא יכולים
We cannot live in fear. If we live in fear, there will also have no peace.
During the war, Palestinian fighters fired more rockets deeper into Israel than ever before. More than 3,000 rockets and mortars killed 15 in Israel and wounded more than 150. One of the rockets landed in the middle of this residential neighborhood.
ניצלנו, שוב פעם.
We survived because people were in the bomb shelters and because God protected us.
You can see here.
Mark Aframov is Sderot's deputy mayor. Gaza's only a mile from here. The damage from that mortar is still visible on his car and on a nearby wall. We first met Aframov 6 months ago when these skies were filled with rockets. On July the 10th, we filmed as Israel's Iron Dome made 3 interceptions. Sderot residents walked into the city's bomb shelter. Aframov brought his son there because it's also the city's daycare.
My work is 24/7. I don't see the kids, so my son being here gives me a sense of security.
Today, Sderot is booming. Construction's everywhere. Aframov and Sderot's residents refuse to leave.
For us, the solution is not leaving, it's the opposite. The solution is to stay and evolve.
Alexei Digilov lives behind the pockmarked wall.
So this is your home.
Ali, mama.
Inside, he shows me where he slept every day for 6 months. A bomb shelter. The windows are 2-inch thick steel.
Gaza is that way. I have to keep this window closed. There's nothing between here and there. A missile may come directly in. We have no alternative.
Okay, זה בסדר, זה יחזור עוד פעם.
People say there will be another war in the future. Whether we want it or not, this is our way of life.
Gadi Yarkoni also knows there could be another war. The Israeli military did not destroy the rocket launcher that targeted him.
My daughter told me she's afraid the same launcher will be used in the next war.
6 months later, like Gadi, Israel is on its feet. But you can still feel their fear and see their wounds. Nick Schifrin, Al Jazeera, Sderot, Israel.
Also joining us this evening from Washington is Nazar Farsak. He's the Project on Middle East Democracy. Thank you so much for your time as well. What is Hamas doing to expedite the reconstruction process in Gaza?
Well, I don't speak for Hamas, but I know that they have, of course, an interest and incentive in reconstruction and improving the situation, because the Palestinian street in Gaza is very flustered and frustrated with the situation. And Hamas doesn't gain any friends by having the economic situation and the humanitarian situation getting worse. The thing with the reconstruction is that it requires many actors, not only Hamas that has the keys to the solution. The solution actually requires several actors, of which Hamas is just one.
Is Hamas's primary priority its people and the protection of its people by providing them food, aid, what have you, or is it still getting to a situation where they can continue to attack Israel?
Again, I don't speak for Hamas. I wouldn't know what their intentions are and what their plans are. But I don't see how any group would benefit from the destruction of their own people. Any group or state actor, if you want to say, Israel or Hamas, or the PA for that matter, of course their primary priority is security before they can provide food and shelter. So it's hard to see how Hamas benefits from lack of security. I think a lot hinges on the relationship between all the parties, and there needs to be a permanent solution and not just a war every 3 or 4 years in a never-ending saga of wars. I think there needs to be a more serious attempt at a permanent solution and not at small fixes.
Do you believe that Israel is not putting enough value on helping provide aid to the civilians and especially the children in Gaza who are still dealing with this war-torn area?
I think, yes, Israel could do more. It's doing a little. What it's doing is symbolic and barely scratches the surface of what could be done. Of course, Israel is not the only party that needs to work on it. However, the fact that Israel takes unilateral steps and is averse to working together with the PA, with the international community, and in fact having to deal with Hamas, whether they like it or not, if they're serious about a permanent solution, they need to be more amenable to international intervention or help, in fact, assistance, so that they can be the bridge between Israel and Hamas as far as the entry of construction material in ways that do not threaten Israel. I think, yes, there is much more that Israel could do in ways of working together with other actors that are needed and are necessary for a genuine solution for the reconstruction.
In addition to the border crossing controlled by Israel, there's also the very important border crossing with Egypt. And today, or recently, an Egyptian court has labeled Hamas as a terrorist organization. How do you think that ruling will affect Hamas's ability to care for its people?
I think it's unfortunate. I think it's going to make the situation even more difficult. Egypt is a very important country. It controls the Rafah crossing, of course, with coordination with Israel. And therefore, that position is definitely going to worsen the situation. I think the international community, Israel, the PA, and the U.S., in fact, need to work together to try to get all the parties working constructively on finding a resolution, and first, and more urgently, working earnestly to start the reconstruction process.
Mr. Farzak, I would also ask you to please stand by for a moment. I want to continue our conversation relative to the aftermath of the war in Gaza. And according to some staggering numbers from UNICEF, more than 370,000 Gazan children show signs of psychological trauma. That's the equivalent of every child in Dallas. Again, here's Nick Schifrin.
In this summer's war, the Bakr children didn't lose their lives, but in their shock, they've lost their words.
Muntasser, can you tell me today, what do you like to do?
Muntasser Bakr was once kind. Today, he's violent. His outbursts target friends and family. All of them are surrounded by poverty. In this neighborhood, little girls climb up walls marked by shrapnel. He's been like this ever since one of the war's most notorious moments. On July 16th, 2 Israeli strikes destroy a beach hut. A group of boys playing nearby start running, but they can't outrun the bombardment. 4 die, including Muntasser's brother. Muntasser himself suffers head, arm, and back wounds. Today, his wounds are invisible. He tried to kill his cousin. He tried to kill himself.
Muntasser, can you tell me what you remember from July?
For so many kids here, the cost of conflict is trauma. Gazan children who've lost their childhoods.
Do you remember what happened?
8-year-old Basan Dihar's favorite place is her uncle's garden. She's lived here for 6 months. Ever since she survived the horror of Shujaiya. More Gazans died here than anywhere else. Today, her home is still in ruins. A green Hamas flag hangs outside. For 3 days, she was buried alive underneath the damage. Her mother, father, and 4 brothers and sisters were killed. The war created 1,500 orphans.
Can you tell me about school? What do you like about your school?
This is the lifelong kind of imagery and scars that are impacting scores of children across Gaza. It's not something that kids can recover from ever.
Pernilla Ironside and UNICEF sponsor therapy for children who've lost a parent or a home. 10-year-old Ibrahim Nasser lost both. Balloons allow children to release anxiety and reassociate the sound of an explosion with something benign. And games with blindfolds increase trust. Ibrahim receives group and individual counseling and walks home with a counselor. But the war still surrounds him. His neighborhood is destroyed. Sewage runs through the street, and his home is a thin, cold caravan.
Children are on the edge of losing hope entirely. Their entire future looks bleak.
But thanks to the exercises, Ibrahim can at least tell me what happened during the war, and even look forward.
Ibrahim, can you tell me what you want to be when you grow up?
دكتور.
Why do you want to be a doctor?
عشان أحد من المصابين.
370,000 Gazan children are mentally injured, prone to violence, shocked and speechless. And only 1 out of 3 is getting any help. Nick Schifrin, Al Jazeera, Beit Lahia, Gaza.
And we welcome back Shahar Azani and Nizar Farksa as we continue this conversation. And Mr. Farksa, let me start with you. When we have political leaders and military leaders involved in the conflict that we've seen over the past several decades, it always appears that the children and the civilians are the ones that don't really get the attention they deserve. So the best thing for those people would be an end to these conflicts. So let's see if we can do our part here to bring some peace to the region. From your vantage point, what would you tell Israel that would help them have a better trust, maybe for Hamas and maybe even the PA, to get to a point where these kids and these other civilians are not suffering?
Well, I would start indeed on the issue of security. Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank want to have their freedom, want to have their state where they are free and feel safe, just as much as Israeli citizens. The difference between the PA in Ramallah and Gaza is that one believes that negotiations is going to lead to that state, and the other believes that it's only violence that's going to lead to that liberation. So what I would ask Israelis to do is to reward or help the parties that are trying to get to the liberation of the Palestinian people through negotiations and through peaceful means, and help show through action and not through words that they are actually sincere in calling back the occupation and actually give Palestinians true freedom and true liberty.
Mr. Azani, do you think that's an option or an opinion that Israel be willing to listen to? And what would you advise Hamas to do in order to bring some type of permanent end to these conflicts?
I'll tell you, first of all, the children that you mentioned, indeed also in Israel, over 400,000 children were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress after the war in Gaza. And when it comes to Hamas, let me be very, very clear. I have a dream. I have a dream that at some point, Hamas's leaders, if they do indeed care about their children and civilian population, will go to the TV channels and take the first step when they say yes to the state of Israel's existence, yes to the agreement signed between Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and no to violence. All they have to do is declare that in their voice and say, we are reaching out with this statement to the Israeli government to open the gates of Gaza in a freer way, to allow construction materials more than you are now, and to rebuild together. Because believe you me, you will not see any incursion by Israel's army into Gaza or any entry from Israel into Gaza, for we have left Gaza in 2005 with a clear purpose of never to come back.
Mr. Azani and Mr. Farksa, thank you so much for your time this evening. We all hope that we can have some type of permanent peace solution in this area in our lifetime. Thank you so much.
Amen.